Hi all, today we're talking about roles and rules. Jumping right into chapter 7. Rules we have talked about before. I have a lot in here that is synonymous with what you're reading in the text. But I have a few things to add, of course. Rules help form a family's culture and their identity. We've talked about that before, and I want you to think about your own families, how rules are implied in terms of behavior that's scoffed at or supported. Are they explicitly stated or not? Were those rules the same for all members, or were they modified? Students often talk about how older siblings had more privileges, more rules, and then later more privileges than younger siblings. And sometimes rules were different depending on the characteristics, the personality traits, or previous behaviors of the child. In terms of the comm literature, a functional rule is that which optimizes open communication, and a dysfunctional rule is one which squelches communication. Next, for roles, we see that roles are socially constructed patterns of behavior and sets of expectations that provide us a position in our families. So, these examples of roles in the family are mom, son, firstborn, man of the house, black sheep, the one who's left out, free spirit. And when we talk about roles, gender roles are a common role that we can discuss. So, there's a lot of literature on this. So we know that parents dictate the gender roles and demonstrate gender roles, and then doing that is one of the ways that they socialize children. They teach children about gender. And children then enact these behaviors and receive feedback about their enactment of those behaviors, which they in turn take out into the world with them when they're reviewing gender roles in society, and those gender roles at the societal level are called gender norms. So that's how that works. Sex is different from gender in that sex is the biological, gender is the socially constructed, but there are small but significant gender differences. So when we think about gender and what males and females are doing, that bell-shaped curve that we've been talking about, in terms of gender, we know that males and females' behaviors are overlapping so much that one of these curves is masculine and one of them is feminine. And we see from this that being male or female in no way means that you're one or the other. These two overlap significantly. So see what men are doing, what women are doing. If that's something like talking at work, we know that women do it a little bit more at home, but that men actually talk more at work. So they're higher in that variable, but the overlap between the two groups is quite high. All right, so no Mars versus Venus. How did your parents communicate gender roles to you? I want you to think about that and norms and what rules were associated with gender. So if you think about how your gender norms align with your own gender, I'm going to remind you of Bem's gender schema theory, which says that we are inclined to follow our same gendered parents. So women tend to turn to their mothers for how to enact womanhood. Young men follow their fathers. And this is important. We watch that same-sex parent for how to enact our gender. If I had two mothers, then I would watch both of them for how to enact womanhood. So then an extension of this is, gender is such an important thing to us that we apply it to things that have no gender, that are neither masculine nor feminine. So let's try it. I'm going to go through each of these and think to yourself if you think of them as masculine or feminine. Dog, cat, shovel, lamp, stove, sports cars. Now, even though I had 3 dogs that were female, when I hear the word dog, when forced to think masculine or feminine, I think masculine. It's stupid. Stupid, yes, but, this is our culture. And most cultures really like gender and like to try and apply it to things that have no gender. So much, too, that we apply male, man, masculine, and feminine for women, even though, for smart and observant, we recognize that men aren't always really masculine and low in femininity, and women aren't always really feminine. But I want you to take BEM's sex role inventory and find out how masculine or feminine you are. If you go to this link, which I'll go to for you now, if you go to that link, you can take a test that will tell you what your left my screen. It will tell you what your sex, how you score on this. Now, when you click on it, there's an option for you to have them score it for you. But you are pretty smart, and I'm sure that you can do the scoring yourself. But if you click through these, this was developed by Sandra Bem. Check for yourself, how self-reliant are you? I'm often self-reliant. Yielding? Nope. Helpful? Always. Defend own beliefs? Often. So you're going to work through that, and then you can have them do it for you, or you can do it for yourself. And the way that you score it is all the odd items are masculine and all the even are feminine. So you can go ahead and pause this, work through the scale, and then come back to us, okay? How did your gender rules and gender norms tie in with your levels of masculinity and femininity? This might be worth noting in your discussion Q&A. Next, we'll talk about gender roles a minute. This is a Bare Naked Ladies song, which I'll let you read those words. It really speaks to the first important point. Gender socialization starts early. So this notion that boys are told they're strong boys and girls are told they're pretty girls, you and I both know that a baby looks the same, whether it's a boy or a girl. They're both adorable. They smell delicious. Little piles of goo, right? They're mushy and awesome. We can't tell what's a boy or a girl. That's stupid. But we do it. We do it. It's not stupid to follow cultural norms. I'm not saying people who say it are stupid, but I mean, this is like pretty silly, right? But gender socialization starts early. So parents socialize through their roles, so what they show their kids, but they also socialize through what the Bare Naked Ladies are talking about. Names and labels for children, calling boys robust and strapping and little girls petite and adorable. Also, when parents discipline or encourage children about their behaviors, their chores, and their toys, all of these are ways that they are directing children in either one way, masculine or feminine, or across, or maybe neither if they're just laissez-faire parents and don't do anything. The next part of this, and also keep in mind, I remind you, commercial civic society teachers, woo, teachers are huge, and classmates are also socializers, so they also play a role. But here, we've got these chains hanging around our necks. People want to strangle us with them before we take our first breath. They say this right after they make this first line about being a strapping boy or a pretty girl. And Bare Naked Ladies are actually making a pretty profound and poignant point here, that while it is a metaphor, they don't really mean we're being hung or strangled. Saying that it's constricting and hurtful when you're boxed so early in life. It's limiting. Who wants to be limited? Not me. Those with less rigid gender roles are more satisfied than those with strict gender roles at the individual level. So we see people are happier when their parents say, do all kinds of chores. If you want to help with the babies, great. If you want to help mow the grass, great. Chores, when you help them with chores, that's great. You want to play with a truck, you want to play with a science kit, you want to play with the makeup, you want to play whatever it is, playing fairly, playing nicely, yes. So when parents are like that, kids don't have very rigid gender roles, and we see that as they grow through life, they're more satisfied with their lives. Also, when parents are less rigid and encourage both sons and daughters to exhibit both masculine and feminine behaviors, they have well-adjusted children. I point this out, every once in a while I hear a student say, well, they flip gender roles. I'm like, well, what do you mean? Say, well, parents who encourage girls to do boy things and boys to do girl things. That's not really a thing. most parents who don't say boys do this and girls do this, all that I've seen so far, they are not restricting. They aren't saying, girls, you can't do feminine things, or girl things, boys, you can't do boy things. What they're saying is do what you want. Be who you want to be. So they're less constrained. And so I just want to point that out. Lesbian and gay parents have the same trends as heterosexual couples, as do single moms and dads. But we do see something that's that seems to stray a bit here, that couples who adhere to strict gender rules through the traditional couple type that you read about in the book, they tend to experience greater marital satisfaction than independent or separate couples. And I really encourage you, this might be something you want to talk about in your discussion question and answer. Why do you think that is? Be careful when doing that. Make sure you're reading carefully and really thinking before you just throw an answer down. Because if you throw down an answer that contradicts what we've just talked about, you're going to have to explain that. Okay? But think smart about this. I'll give you a hint. It has something to do with what we're going to talk about in a minute here with expectations. Okay, so gender roles and identities and the treatment of others. We do see that our gender norms are associated with how much we accept other people, less rigid gender norms, more acceptance of other people, our willingness to speak out against sexist behavior and speak up for other people. Also, the ways that we help others, just generally speaking, the more masculine style, we tend to help others in public when other people are seeing it, and more feminine style, we are more discreet, the anonymous donors and that kind of thing. So if you're high in both, you probably like giving in both ways. Unless you're selfish, and that's a whole other thing. But none of you are selfish. Okay, expectations. Talking about expectations. Expectations are really nicely addressed in the C.S. Lewis poem, which I don't want to go on and on about now because we aren't in class together. We don't have a lot of time. But this is a quote by C.S. Lewis. It's actually a quotation. I hate when people say quote when they mean quotation. Quote's a verb. Quotation's a noun. But this quotation from C.S. Lewis, where he talks about being in love, and we talked about that last time, and how that lust is fleeting. But he says knowledge can last, principles can last, habits can last. Habits, ooh, behaviors, I love it. But feelings come and go. And in fact, whatever people say, the state called being love usually does not last. That's right, you're so smart, C.S. Lewis. Habits endure. And so when we have expectations for each other, let's try and talk about habits and behaviors. How important are expectations? Well, role expectations are internalized sets of belief about the ways we will function. So an expectation is what I think will happen. Standards are a little bit different. Standards are what I think should happen. They're ideals. So think standard should, SS. Importance of expectation and standards for marriage. I'm going to drop some knowledge about the trends here. In romantic relationships, women have higher standards than men. They also experience more disappointment. Having similar standards in a couple. Sorry, this is all heteronormative. I'm sorry, we don't have enough data. So this is husband and wife. So having similar standards and meeting those standards are both important to satisfaction. You have same standard as your partner and you meet those standards, more satisfied. But be careful here because what we're also seeing are some interesting trends where we don't really do such a good job of interpreting each other's behaviors as we think. We're not so accurate. When men do 50% of housework, both men and women report that the man is doing much more than the woman. Huh? What? Shows how our norms and expectations and standards, they get all kinds of mushy, right? So mathematically, we're both doing half. So why is it that both of us would perceive that the dude is doing more than the gal? I think I know, because we have a lower standard for the man. No, we shouldn't have low standards for men. They can do lots of cool stuff. Okay, importance of expectations and standards for the family. So now we're looking outside of the couple, across members. This is a big point, and I'm going to have this on your exam for sure. Both expectations and standards play a role, but it's standards, not expectations, and whether or not they're met that is more important to satisfaction. So let's say you have an expectation. Maybe my expectation is that people lie. My partner's going to lie because people lie. That's what I think will happen. But my standard is people should not lie. People should be honest. When we look at what's going to make me happy in a relationship, it's that standard and how much my partner meets that versus how much he or she meets my expectation. So standards are key. And that's true outside of romantic relationships too, for family, siblings, parent-child. So gendered expectations, just keep in mind that people follow the expectations that society holds, the gender norms for their behaviors, but small but significant ways. Many of us do, especially when gender is salient. We talked about salience last time. If your gender is salient all or most of the time, then you're more likely to enact those behaviors often and have traits such as talking a lot, focusing on emotions a lot, being aggressive, being a good listener. Both gender differences shrink. Gender differences shrink all of the time. And so that's a lot like that changing culture of fatherhood that we talked about last week. I want to point this out, though. This is hugely important. And I have a little handout from Palomare's work if you're interested on this. So we see that when we're in an interaction and someone asks us to think about ourselves as male or female, this salience idea, we behave in more gendered ways. So for instance, if we go into a classroom, we say, I'm doing a study. I'm interested in knowing what men and women think about blah, 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 blah. If we say that to one group, that group is going to behave in ways that are more stereotypical. A female response, a male response. The females are going to say, I really like the feminine things. I really don't like the masculine, and vice versa. But if I go into a classroom and I say, I want to know what you all think of these things, and I don't mention gender or sex or any of that stuff, we're going to see less of a difference in their responses, which makes us realize that we prime people to think that they're more gendered. We can say things that make them think, oh, wait, I'm a girl, so I should write like this. And so we want to be really careful about that, I think. Okay. So these things follow us to work, work-family conflict. So our expectations and standards that are met or not at home, they spill over. A spillover effect is when a problem in one area then manifests in the other. It's also called indirect conflict. And it's often has something to do with not having power. Like at work, you may not have power, and maybe your boss is being not so great. You can't have a fight with your boss. You can't just get into it with your boss. He or she has a lot of power over you. So you might come home and take it out on your partner and be naughty and say kind of mean things or be aloof. Spillover effect. Work-family border theory addresses some of these things, and that's pretty neat. You should check that out in the book, and how it intersects with culture. Keep in mind that what's on the books for gender norms and gender rules in an organization may be different from what they actually do. For instance, you might have at your work paternity leave. Oh, men should take time off work after they have a baby, and this is what you can take off. And you think, that's great. I want to work there. I love staying home with my kids and helping out with the baby. Well, then once you work at that place, you realize that everybody laughs about the policy and that the last person who took actual paternity leave doesn't work here anymore. Ooh. So just be mindful. What's on the books may differ from the cultural norms. I want to just share something briefly with you from Big Fat Greek Wedding as we do a bit on Chapter 8. There's less on this chapter. So in this scene, we're going to shift gears and talk about power, but it's still pretty gendered. Think about how you think about power, especially in the family. Now watch this clip.
Come, don't you worry, I'm going to talk to him. My dad is so stubborn. What he says goes. The man is the head of the house. Let me tell you something, Tula. The man is the head, but the woman is the neck. And she can turn the head any way she wants.
So power can be a lot of different things. Some of these conceptions are written up in the book. Keep in mind, often power is about holding the attention of other people. Can sometimes be having the most resources needed for you, like a baby even has a lot of power. And power tends to shift around in the family. In your book, we've already talked about pro-social power exertion, like being confirming, moral appeal, and you can model good behaviors. But antisocial power assertion includes one-ups and other disconfirming messages, that big old list that's in this chapter, and then also use of the silent treatment, which is when we're strategically ambiguous and letting our disapproval be known. Or we don't talk to somebody in the family. They may even ask us what's wrong, and we go, nothing. So what we're doing is we're letting them know we're upset, but we're not talking about why. And that can really make people in the family upset, make them feel a loss of control. Next unit, we'll talk more about power and control and how these are particularly problematic in the family. But for now, just a couple of final points here. Whoops. One is about this problem-solving loop. Do you do it? Most families have a hard time. Check that out in the book and think about if you do that or not and why. FamComm patterns are the last thing that we'll talk about in this unit. So, FamComm patterns are based on 2 orientations. And what these are is they're ways of categorizing families into groups to understand how they work, and all of this is very parent-driven. Some of it overlaps a little bit with the circumplex model. Now, we've got conversation orientation and conformity orientation. So, let's talk about each of these. Where you fit on these continuum is where you are in your family type. So first we have conversation orientation, and conversation orientation is the degree to which the parents create this climate where all members are encouraged to have unrestrained participation in all types of topics. So if you're high in conversation orientation, that means that you have free, frequent, spontaneous talk. You're gabbing all the time about all sorts of things, and everyone's, oh, talk, 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 tell me, tell me, tell me. Ooh, yes, be open. Low end, conversation is stifled. Stifled to such a degree that family members might even just stop trying altogether because no one wants to hear what they have to say. So that's the continuum. That's the amount of openness that's encouraged in a family is conversation orientation. Now, conformity orientation is how much a family stresses the homogeneity of values, beliefs, and attitudes. Homogeneity means we're all on the same page. So a family that's high in conformity orientation, really the parents set the tone of, in our family, we all agree. We have the same way of thinking, the same beliefs, attitudes. So these families have a lot of conflict avoidance. Why would we have a conflict? We all always agree. Very high in harmony and very interdependent. Because the thought is we all think a lot, act like we're very, very similar. And obedience is stressed. Well, you should be obedient, right? Because we're all on the same page always. That's high end. Low end, individuality and dissenting thoughts are not only present and known, but they're emphasized and encouraged. Families that are really low in conformity orientation get excited about difference within the family. And they also tend to really stress equality of the members. This chart tells you how the types pan out in terms of how high or low they are in conversation and conformity, and the different what the different labels are. The families that are best suited, the families that tend to do the best, are those that are high in conversation, which shows you the importance of conversation orientation, that openness that we've been talking about. Consensual is optimum. Pluralistic is also good. Now let's jump down to pluralistic. If you're a very mature child, conversation is high and conformity is low, that pluralistic orientation is great for you because you're smart enough to figure out what should and shouldn't be done based on other things in the family. You don't need the strict, we all agree to keep you in line. And so this is a great one. It lets you learn and grow. But if you're not so super high in maturity, you're just average in maturity, which is great. Average is the norm, you know. High conversation coupled with high conformity is optimum. And that's why we see this as 2 asterisks for being extra good as opposed to just good, because most of us aren't above average. We're average or below, you know, it's a bell-shaped curve too. So we see that when you've got openness stressed in your family, but your family also stresses, we have homogeneous thinking here. That really helps the children to grow, and also they get that structure. They get to practice talking, openness, and they know that they are valued, but they also know they're part of something very consistent. And so they don't have to do as much of that high-level thinking that you have in the absence of conformity, or low conformity rather. Protective families don't do as well. They're low in conversation. Conversation is stifled, and they're high conformity. So protective family, their parents don't really let them grow a lot. And they don't really communicate that those children have a lot to contribute, but there's still some benefits of the high conformity. But when you're low in both, laissez-faire, man, that is not a great situation. It's really like little involvement, little care. So even though conversation is more helpful than conformity in regard to individual and relational well-being, consensual is optimum with pluralistic short behind. They work better together. So meaning conversation and conformity work better together. Video might cut off here just in case. A few slides remain here. Consensual, I talked about this. They're interested in the children and ideas, so they feel they have the ultimate say. This can create tension, but the stability is helpful. So I just talked about that. It gives you a little bit more. They spend a lot of time helping children understand their decision making, which is great. Pluralistic families are very open families who welcome their children to speak freely. For mature children, this is very good. This is very good. Protective families have lots of rules and restrictions and little freedom. Despite being stronger in the worst orientation, these families often convey love and warmth. You can't overextend the orientations to include a lack of affection or care. Of course, encouraging your children to talk is really important, but even if you're not doing that, you can still communicate how much you love them, and that happens in many protective families. Laissez-faire families, they're few and far between, and honestly, it's hard for us to get them to even participate because they're not involved in each other's lives. They don't really want to be involved in research. And they're very similar to those chaotic and disengaged families that we talked about when we talked about Olson's circumplex model. So, rules, roles, and our surrounding expectations are very impactful within and outside of the family realm. That's it.